Monday, the 12th of August. Welcome everyone to today's edition of Business Morning. I am boasting of Nigerian businesses and markets are closed for a two-day Muslim holiday. So let's have a very, very special conversation around the state of the economy. A high-level special policy change stakeholders dialogue was held in Lagos on July the 29th, where the experts identified some critical missing links in Nigeria's economic governance metrics. Top on the list are poor interministerial and interagency cooperation, collaboration, and cohesion. According to the experts, these have resulted in poor or badly prepared fiscal and monetary policies, resulting in equally poorly delivered governance actions to the detriment of the economy and the Nigerian people. That's the first part of this three-part conversation with economist and financial consultant Dr. Biodun Adedipe, who is also the founder and chief consultant at B. Adedipe Associates Limited. Is live here with us at our global headquarters in Lagos. Dr. Adedipe, thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure.
We appreciate your time. We want to drill down on this particular area of our governance. But first, let's understand Nigeria's governance structure.
That's right.
Let's set that premise.
Okay, thank you so very much for having me here for this conversation. I think primarily, if you look at the structure, which in fact I would say the way we run it now is defective. Now, it's one of what you call the four vital functions of management, which means if you really want to deliver results, first is to organize very well. Now, it means you have an overarching purpose from the president of the country in terms of where he wants to take all of us. And then he has people selected in the cabinet who are the ministers. So we have the reporting lines very clear in terms of ministers reporting to the president, not reporting to a kitchen cabinet. Now, I say that deliberately, because we've seen this play around in Nigeria for many decades. And we are casting our mind back now from independence. So we are not talking just about the Buhari administration. Okay, so looking back. Now, that is where the structure starts from. Then we have also the permanent secretaries that report to the ministers. We have also agencies in various ministries. And of course, there are departments of the ministries as well. Agencies also are expected within that structure to report directly to the ministers, who are the accounting officers for the ministry. But whenever the head of an agency or a permanent secretary will have direct access either to the president or those within his office, then that structure has become defective, in which case proper control, which is the essence of structure, will become lacking. So now take that also into what we describe as the coherence and internal consistency of policies. Now, there are three major planks to policies. There is fiscal, which is to do with government fiscal operations in terms of generating revenue and spending. So now it has to be aligned with monetary policy, which deals with three basic things. And that is how much money is there out in the open market, what is the price of credit, and of course, you also talk about the cost of money. Of course, it's like looking at the same coin from the two sides of it. Now, the purpose of the central bank, therefore, as the apex monetary authority, is to ensure that what it does aligns with fiscal operations. And on the other hand, also, the fiscal authorities, we want to ensure that what they do aligns with the monetary policy. So now, take that also and bring in the commercial policy. And that is where you see customs, the tariffs, variously, which means the three of them must be aligned. You cannot, for example, say you want to discourage the importation and consumption of a particular item, but have a very low import duty on it. That means you're encouraging the delivery of that good to Nigerians very cheap. And naturally, if as we say about the rational man, he will prefer an item that is cheaper than the one produced locally that is more expensive. So all of this must be aligned.
If we go back to the structure
That's right.
In terms of, it's not wrong for ministers or permanent secretaries to have access to Mr. President,
Sure.
or members of the presidency, as it were,
That's right.
under whatever administration, military or civilian. But what is the problem here, really? Because it looks like because everybody have access to Mr. President, or wants to be in the good book of Mr. President, how do we then have cohesion and collaboration and policies that are designed and delivered not for personal interest but for the Commonwealth?
Now, where the problem is that we don't usually see ourselves as a team. And the way it goes is that individuals play the match, but teams win the championship. Until we buy that principle and recognize that, look, I'm a minister, for example, in the cabinet, but I'm not playing alone. I'm playing with other ministers, in which case all of us must be pulling in the same direction. And the simple illustration we give in describing team working is to say there are 5 of us in a team, everybody brings a 10 to the table. Multiply that 10, it's like 10 raised to power 5. That produces 100,000. Now, if the next round of performance, 4 of us bring a 10 each, and the 5th member of our team brings a 5, that means if you multiply through, you get 50,000, which means one member not doing what he's supposed to do has halved our output, our productivity as a team. In which case, the real strength of that team is when it works together. Everybody bringing his own part to the table. And there's also one key principle here, and that's the fact that there is no star in a team. If we truly want to get results out of this structure.
Unlike the Premier League?
Exactly. There is no star in the team. Which means if you truly will have a team, everybody has his or her own mandate, but all focusing on what I call the anchor. We'll get to that later. We'll talk about the anchor. There has to be an anchor that everybody is working towards in terms of achievement.
So when we say there are super ministers in the cabinet, for example, and we pick and choose, and out of 36 ministers, sometimes in a 4-year period, if you mention some ministers, some folks on the street are going to say, what are you talking about? They don't even know he or she existed. How do we arrive at such, even among the super ministers, that becomes very difficult to have policies designed and delivered, becomes very difficult. So we keep going, not really going at the speed at which we ought to.
Well, really, where the problem lies is the way we also manage their performance. And I've repeated this over the years. Now, the moment you begin to look at every ministerial office as having a mandate to deliver specifics that we in the consultants language call deliverables, one that is defined for every minister, and you begin to also measure their performance along those deliverables, everybody becomes relevant.
Or some ministers perhaps believe that their portfolio is more important than other cabinet ministers. Would that be a thinking somewhere?
I don't see that way. And in fact, you can give illustrations here. If you look at health and education, there is a very high correlation between their ultimate output, and that is towards productivity. Now, when you talk about education, you are thinking about capacity building. And so, which capacity are you building? You want to be able to have people that are competitive, highly productive. But how will they be highly productive if they are not healthy? So health comes into that as well.
But do you think cabinet ministers see it this way?
That is what the conversation should begin to look like going forward. If we truly want to achieve what we desire for Nigerians, our conversation should shift from, I'm in charge of education, and that is where my mandate ends. But I see that for me to succeed in my ultimate end, I must also work with health ministry. That's just to illustrate. In the same manner, just to illustrate again, the ministry that is responsible for the Nigerian Ports Authority, which be under transportation, is also working very closely with finance that is responsible for customs. In which case, for example, if one says, look, I want port operations to be 24/7, then the other one will not say, because I belong to another ministry, therefore we do things our way. Everybody is looking at the same mandate, the same anchor that we want to achieve. We want port efficiency. We want also to reduce the time it takes for a good to come into Nigeria and leave the port. So how do we do that? We have to work together and also pull in the same direction. So that team working makes the person in customs not to see himself as exclusively in charge of customs, but see that I need to look across and see which ministry I need to work with in order to achieve the ultimate aim of port efficiency, which ultimately also impacts the cost of doing business anyway.
You've spent some time on the business and government circuit. What's the field experience like when we talk about a team that works together, wins together? Where really is the lacuna? You spent so much about what's the field experience and how do you think this could be remedied?
Well, in my experience in the private sector, when we talk about team working, now it starts from you have a leader that is very clear in terms of vision, where the team is going, and that also is clearly communicated to the members of the team.
To everyone?
To everyone in the team.
And at the same time?
At the same time. It is very clear. So, and then within that team, everyone knows his or her role. In which case, call it the language of the private sector, we call it job description. But the typical job description also comes with specifying your reporting relationships, the purpose of your office. It talks about your major responsibilities, then defines your key performance indicators. The idea then is that the leader doesn't need to look over your shoulder to know whether you are performing or not. On your own, because you know your KPIs. You wake up each morning, you know what your performance will be assessed on. So if I do self-evaluation, I should be able to tell at the end of the day that I've earned my pay or not. And of course, after a certain period of time, I also know whether I qualify to remain in that team or not. Their values are also well defined. We call it core values in the private sector. What are our core values? Which means, what are those things that any member will do here, contrary to those core values, that we say, look, you cannot remain in this team. Well defined. And so, the leader also must demand performance. Now, I see that lacking most of the time in our public sector. The leader must demand performance, which means, I expect you as a member of my team to perform with respect to your responsibilities. And you know that if you perform, there will be reward. In fact, in team working, we talk about the 3 R's. We call them repeated reward and recognition. In which case, you perform, I recognize that, I reward you for it. You do that again, I repeat it. So we call it the 3 R's. So that principle also makes a team to function effectively. So if, as a member of the president's cabinet, I perform, it will be recognized, it will be rewarded. The reward is the fact that I will run my entire tenure of 4 years in that office. But the real consequence of non-performance will be that if first quarter I'm evaluated based on my deliverables, I fell below expectation, I fall below expectation. Second quarter, third quarter, there should be a provision somewhere that says if I fall short of my expectations, a number of consecutive quarters, I do not merit to remain in that cabinet. So now, if that provision exists, that brings a sense of seriousness and commitment to those deliverables by every member of the cabinet. That is when you have a team that becomes functional and effective.
Is there a problem with the process of selecting cabinet ministers, politically speaking?
Well,
does it need to be rejigged?
Yes, looking at what our experience has been, again, since independence, because that's the conversation here.
Yes.
We've seen instances where people made it to the cabinet because they had made their marks professionally. And so it appeared like, in the light of their achievements in a particular professional field, that also brought them into the cabinet. But most of the time, maybe I would say, for the sake of conversation, rule of thumb, maybe between 70-80% of the time, we appoint people who are politicians and who also appear to have supported the incumbent to win election, either by way of being influential in their constituency or because their constituency says, this is the person we want to represent us. In which case, competence is not the primary consideration, rather it is political alignment.
Did you see this also play out at the state levels, at the subnational?
Unfortunately, the same thing happens at the state level. In fact, I would say that it is worse there from what one has seen around the country. And that is why most of those governments are not effective. They are not delivering the expectations in terms of governance to the people because they have, most of the time, wrong people in their team.
So how do we change this? What should we do? Because we are now heading for another milestone, which is 2020, yes. 2023.
Now, one of the ways we can change that, I will put 2 things on the table. The first is that this sort of conversation should be ongoing, especially when we are getting to a point where members are being selected into the cabinet. Now, the other point I want to make is that the time we also want to evaluate ministerial nominees and at the subnational level, commissioner nominees, that there should be proper evaluation. We must depart from the practice of you come in because either you are a former colleague in some political space or because you've been a member of the assembly, whether at the state or national, I ask you to take a bow. We must depart from that practice, which is people should be evaluated based on their antecedents. Because it's a national, huge responsibility. You don't bring a tyro into that. Now, a tyro is someone you will say is new within that kind of space. You don't also bring somebody into an area where it doesn't have the competence. So in which case, competence and antecedents become key attributes for selecting people into the cabinet. Now, we have ministers already approved by the National Assembly, the Senate, as we speak now. The next question should be, who should be where? Because that's a major thing we do in the private sector. Now, when you build a team, it is not enough to know the competencies of the various members of the team, but you also ask the important question, who should be where doing what? If you don't put the right people where they belong in terms of competence and antecedents, you may not get results. And that is very critical. So we must keep this in conversation and also keep reminding our leaders, people at the forefront, that when they want to build their cabinet, they should give more consideration to this rather than primordial sentiments of political relationships and alignment. So I don't have any problem with the federal character per se, okay? The federal character can still thrive if you have your best team selected, representing the different ethnic groups in Nigeria. So that is not a problem for me. The real problem is who is where doing what? What are the antecedents? So if this person has performed before, even if it's coming direct from the private sector, I want to also see what he achieved there. So all of those will give me an idea of what he will likely do in the office. But what reinforces performance is when you demand for it.
The selection of the screening at the National Assembly is understandable.
Yeah.
But names are forwarded to Mr. President.
That's right.
Does the Mr. President or the presidency do his own screening, aside for competence, aside the security screening, checks, which of course, yes, goes to checks? Is it important?
I see that as very, very important. That apart from the security screening, which I know is really what is emphasized there. You know, having experienced at the time, you know, an offer of an appointment, and then, of course, the only thing they ask me is that I will go to security screening. So that gives me an idea of how the process works. But in my own view here, we should be putting more emphasis on competence and what this individual has achieved in the past. So in which case, you bring this person to an office, and you are saying, look, just for the sake of discussion, power works and housing, okay? You can take that ministry, it has 3 legs. Each of the legs, you can have clearly defined targets, deliverables. I say, okay, for year 2020, we expect that the minister in charge of works will deliver this number of kilometers of roads, good quality, lifespan of the road, in which case it is very clear what you expect you to deliver. So end of 2020, that is what we'll be measuring such minister against, not against how much was allocated to his ministry and how much of that was expended. That I'll be talking about what was delivered.
The output.
Output. Because that is how we measure performance.
So the same thing for power, for works, and for housing, for that particular minister.
Exactly.
In health, you do the same thing.
Now replicate it. Now, when you come to health, interestingly, when you get to health, it's about the quality of our health institutions. But you can now bring in also a metric that says we want to see the reduction in the spend on medical tourism. In which case, it's not about just having the 3 tiers of health institutions. It is primary, you know, the diagnostics,
the basic, yes.
To get to tertiary.
Yes.
But now we're talking about, look, we want those resuscitated. We want them to be effective. We wanted to go beyond just prescription houses into delivering effective medical services. But equally, the bigger picture, which is where the problem with Nigeria is coming from. Now, we often say that our economy is not diversified. It's not correct. The economy itself is diversified. So many economic activities. Look at the chart of our gross domestic product. You will see that. Where the problem is that our foreign earnings is not diversified.
Okay, we'll talk more about this when we get into the second part of this conversation. Dr. Biodun Adedekwe. Let's take a break, everyone. We'll be right back. Nigeria is currently in what can be described as a pressure cooker environment in which social tensions is rising, population is increasing, wealth is declining, jobs are nowhere to be found or very difficult to come by. Then you have the spate of criminal enterprise. So how do we de-stress the current socio-economic stress and anxiety environment and using the incoming cabinets and President Buhari's second term to bring wealth and ease tensions generally, in particular around the grassroots level and the middle class of the economy? This conversation, the second part of it, with Dr. Biodun Adedekwe, economist and financial consultant, founder, chief consultant at B. Adedekwe Associates Limited. Thank you so much, Doctor. Let's continue this conversation. If we bring what we'll discuss about a team that work together, talent is good, but you need a teamwork to win championships. And that's what we saw over the weekend. Some folks lost, and they're still not happy. I don't want to go there. They got 4-0 over the weekend. So that shows that team that work together can actually win together. But when we look at our pressure cooker environment, what's your reading of where we are at the moment? How tense do you think the country really is from the top to bottom?
Well, looking at where we are today, 2019, and we have just 4 months to 2020. For those of us who were part of the conversation when Vision 2020 was birthed, it's a time of sober reflection. Because I remember then, some 13 years ago, that I was invited to a foreign television station on Nigeria Vision 2020. And all they wanted to hear from me as a Nigerian is, we are not convinced that this your vision is realistic. So they wanted me to convince them, beaming to the entire world, that Nigeria's Vision 2020 was realistic. And of course, I made my argument, being someone who was involved in the conversation that evolved into that. So now when you look at it today, a few months to 2020, you ask yourself, what went wrong? That means there were certain things we were supposed to have done, we left undone. There were things we were not supposed to do that we have been doing. So the critical question for us today is, what needs to change? So now within this sort of environment where everything is contrary to what we expected, yes, the economy has been growing quite all right, and that's a major issue here. Yes, we suffered a recession in 2016. The economy picked up again, climbed out of recession, it's been growing, but sluggishly, which is not peculiar to Nigeria anyway. But the issue for us is this. As of today, we are growing, but we are not creating jobs. We are growing. Of course, like I said, it's a global phenomenon. There is also more inequalities. So as it is with the rest of the world, it's also happening here. So in which case, there must be certain things that need to change. And the first primary one I will put forward is that having researched how nations that developed, especially the emerging markets, those nations that started with Nigeria about 1960, thereabout, give 10 years before, 10 years after, that attained political independence. How did they move their economies to where they are and move their societies to where they are, where a lot of their population were moved from below the poverty line to above the poverty line? How did they do that? Now, having researched that, I discovered something, that not any single one of those nations lacks what I would call an anchor. You can't develop inclusively without an anchor for your economy, in which case there must be either an economic activity or a sector of the economy that is your primary focus. In fact, I can work in the manner of what we do when we look at negotiation. Now, in negotiation, we say there is the law of four. The law of force says that when you negotiate an issue, there must be a big issue, which is what is important to you, and you look for 3 other smaller issues where you are ready to give concessions to the other party. Now, the whole idea is that we must have a big sector or economic activity that is our anchor. And in this conversation, when I thought about it, I was able to pick out 3 for Nigeria. Now, one is agriculture. Now, we need agriculture because of population. And the government must also be conscious of population growth. And I say this with every sense of responsibility. Now, as of today, world population is 7.7 billion people. It is projected to grow to 9.7 by 2050. That means an increase of 2 billion. Nigeria's population is now about 202 million people, estimated population. And that population is expected between now and 2050 at the current growing rates, vis-a-vis the rate at which populations of other countries around the world is growing. We will double our population by 2050. What does that mean? It means 2 billion increase in world population. 10% of that will happen in Nigeria. Okay? So if 200 million of that increase of 2 billion will be in Nigeria, that sends a very strong signal in terms of what we should be doing, in terms of population, control on the one hand. On the other hand, this population as it is growing will also produce more people looking for jobs, apart from having more mouths to feed. So in which case, you have a connection there between needing to raise productivity on the one hand, and also needing to create jobs faster than we are doing today. So in which case, what needs to change? So I said, first and foremost, take agriculture. We need to deal with agriculture with all seriousness. Yes, a lot has been done in the last few years, and we are seeing the changes. So, but agriculture, primary, manufacturing must go with that. And I'll bring something in context here. Now, from my personal experience, and I believe very strongly, I'm privileged to be exposed to those things, that some countries have tried with Nigeria, where they identify private operators here in Nigeria, and they go to them deliberately, make them offers to take them to their own countries. If I know of a case where the government of a West African country approached this manufacturer in Nigeria and said, come to our country. We help you to produce your product here and sell to Nigeria. In which case, they recognize that the market here is in Nigeria. Population, even money-wise, along the West African coast. They know that. But they knew that if that man's factory would leave Nigeria for their country, it will create jobs there. So, and that is the connection here. The more factories you have here, the more jobs are created. And of course, what they produce also feeds the market, which is here. And that brings us to the issue of this African trade agreement that we signed. When we signed it, we never signed with a condition. We merely signed because there was so much pressure from within and outside to sign it. And so, from what I have seen, let me say within the last 30 years of my professional exposure within that space, if I back it to 1987, that would make it 32 years of being involved in tariff structures around the world and how nations compete with each other. Nigeria is competing, but we don't seem to have the sense that we are competing with the rest of the world. And so what do? We go to sign an agreement without the conditions to what Nigeria expects in return. So now, a study came out in the last couple of days that says by the reason of signing that agreement, between now and year 2050, Nigeria's imports will grow by 251%. Because what we see happening now is that most of those who want to manufacture will choose other African countries as their base with the intention of selling their product to Nigeria, because if it leaves their country for a year, no tariffs. So in which case you can produce anywhere in Africa, but the market is there in Nigeria for you. 1 out of 5 Africans.
So I'm here for thinking,
yeah,
how do we now have our own productivity base?
Precisely.
Increase. Our productivity in Naira terms is
right.
less than about 1,000 Naira or less per person.
That's right.
And we need to create more jobs. Population inflow is huge, whether by birth or by those who are coming in across the borders and whatever. So we keep growing. So how do we quickly ramp up on this and reduce social tensions, criminal enterprise that's beginning to choke the economy and the people, taking lives.
Now,
And the sense of restlessness that we're beginning to feel in the air among youth, even adults.
That's right. Now, this is not only about spending on security. The focus should be on how do we create jobs. So how does that happen?
So it's not really about buying more weapons. Yeah, we need weapons.
We need weapons, yes.
We need munitions. We need munitions.
We need that,
yes,
as deterrent. But more importantly, when a man is hungry, he doesn't care about a bullet.
So it's not about the Nigerian army or the police recruiting more. They are recruiting. I haven't seen recruitment in critical economic sectors.
That is fine. Now, what we need to do more is to spend on physical infrastructure, because the more you spend on physical infrastructure, the more jobs you create at that level to start with. Equally, what I see other nations that have done this successfully is that there's a strong partnership between the private and public sector. So first thing our public officials must have at the forefront of their minds is that the private sector is not competing with them. Because they have this mind that they are in competition with the private sector. It is not so. Rather, they should begin to see private sector as partners. And secondly on that, they should not wait in their offices for private sector operators to come to them asking for incentives. They should get up from their offices and go after those people. That's what other countries have been doing. So you go to them, offer them incentives so that they can create the necessary jobs. You give them incentives, ask them. And I'll give an illustration here. I served for a 3-month period, in the government some 8 years ago. But one of the things we did then, which I think is highly recommended today as well, was to ask ourselves, if job creation is the primary challenge Nigeria is facing, which sectors will create jobs very fast and in large numbers? We picked out textiles. We said we needed to revive the textile industry. We picked up the automobile industry. We said that needed also to be revived, because the value chains there is not about you producing the vehicle, but that vehicle has components. Some of them also being fabricated here locally. So now, if you are able to reach those who had gone out of business in that area and bring them back to business, likely we start creating jobs in pockets. We call them in clusters all around Nigeria. And we approached an automobile manufacturer at the time. And then he told us the story of a government that came from one of these West African countries to ask him to come to their country, relocate his factory. But they will help him to sell his vehicles to Nigeria. And so he said, okay, no, wait a minute. What do you need? Now, notice, he didn't come to us. We went to him. And we asked him, what do you need? He said, well, if he has access to cheap loans, he said, we have no authority as far as interest rates are concerned. But how about this aspect? We can make government ministries, departments, and agencies to buy your vehicles. He said, oh, if government will do that, then I have a ready market. Because for him, the headache is ready market if he has to expand. Because people will prefer imported vehicles to his own, because it is Nigerian brand. And we said, okay, what we do is we initiate a policy that the president will sign, that all MDAs should buy your vehicles. That much we did at the time. Of course, the man is today expanded and is doing well in business, I would say. Now, that is the way I think our public officials should take things. And that means also public-private partnership should become an important model for new infrastructure delivery. This has happened in many other countries. I did something in this respect. I looked at the countries that are top 10 infrastructure-wise, because there's an infrastructure index for every country in the world. I looked at the top 10. I then also went to this noise we make about borrowing. I looked at GDP, the sovereign debt, GDP ratio. I looked at the top 10 in the world. I then asked myself, are there countries that fall into the two? And I saw countries in them. Then I ran a covariance analysis. I found that the relationship between borrowing and world-class infrastructure is 63.95%, which means it is not the problem with borrowing that is the issue, It is what you do with the money borrowed. And when you borrow to deliver good roads, that will aid logistics, because that's the problem of most economies like Nigeria. The reason we can't create jobs is because there is what I call bottlenecks in our logistics. So if you resolve logistics, that means business transactions will be concluded faster. And that connects to productivity issue that you raised. So once I'm able to complete transaction cycles faster than I used to do, I will generate more revenue as a private person. That also means I'll pay more tax. So invariably, both private sector revenue will go up and government revenue will also go up. So in which case, it is important to give more attention to physical infrastructure, the roads and railways. If we need to borrow to do that, let's do it. Because data supports the fact that countries that have the best infrastructure in the world are also heavily borrowed. So, but if you look across at their productivity, surprisingly, they're also the same countries that rank very highly in productivity.
China.
So, exactly. You see China, you see United States,
China
you see Singapore.
It's taking money heavily.
It's borrowing heavily.
And it's building
and yet it has the largest stretch of expressways in the world. In fact, China I took as a case study some 11 years ago when I presented something to the federal government of Nigeria on what we titled Infrastructure Nigeria. I took China as a model then and looked at how China planned to deliver expressways. By the way, very sobering. Nigeria built the first expressway before China, and that is this Lagos-Ibadan expressway. Delivered 21 years before China constructed the first expressway, which was even only 18 kilometers stretch. But as we speak today, China has the longest stretch of expressways in the world. And of course, railways. For each of those things, they will target the country that is #1 in the world and now set a target date to ensure they outperform them. So for expressway, they chose US, which has 75,000 kilometers as at that time. And China said our target is to deliver 85,000 kilometers in 30 years. They did it in far less than 30 years. Then they looked at Russia, longest stretch of railways in the world. And they set 2012 as their target to deliver the longest stretch of railways in the world. China is connected to England. Because I saw when the first train carrying manufactured goods from China arrived in London with a ribbon, on the
on the cargo.
On the cargo.
Yes,
very interesting.
Yeah, officially.
So essentially, when you look across at Singapore, Malaysia, and all of these countries that we can take as models to look at what it is, South Korea, for example. Now, most of them gave attention to this critical infrastructure. When China was to deal with ICT, they benchmarked South Korea, just to illustrate. So Nigeria must begin to benchmark which country do we want to outperform in any particular area. So it's not about just building roads. It's not about, we have this number of kilometers of roads paved, this number not paved. But that's the data that we talk about.
But where are the benchmarks?
Now, that is the issue. So we have to ask ourselves that first and foremost, Nigeria is in competition. We are competing with the rest of the world for resources. In terms of foreign investments, in terms of retaining domestic investment that wants to go out, and also in terms of creating jobs. So what do we do in order to create the jobs here? So in which case, we look at a country that we can pick as benchmark in each of those areas, not a country for everything. And that's the model China followed.
Yeah, not everything about nothing.
Yeah,
correct. We're entering a new, or we're already in a new world of economic, and I say disorder, in the manner of speaking.
Oh.
So we were coming from a bit of orderliness in global economic space and markets. Now we're entering a totally new phase entirely.
Yeah.
So how do we play the game in this brand new world of socio-economic disorder? It's a very big one.
Very big.
But we have about 5 minutes to discuss that.
All right.
We'll come back after the break. You're watching this special edition of Business Morning. So let's wrap up this conversation with Dr. Biodun Adedipe, economist and chief consultant at B. Adedipe Associates Limited, around the new world of economic power play. Dr. Adedipe, thank you so much. It's been nice having you through nearly an hour. So what's your take, and how do you think Nigeria should play the year 2020 and beyond President Buhari's second term into 2023? It's a new world out there.
Indeed.
And everyone can feel the heat already.
Indeed. Now, the first thing we must recognize here is that the rational economic man has disappeared. What you find happening all around the world is that people are becoming socially adaptable. And being socially adaptable means they will find a way to get access to what they want. They no longer are rational about whether it is legal or not. So in which case, you have to create an environment that makes the socially adaptable man to actually consider that the way to go is to do what is right. And you can still achieve your objectives by doing what is right. But that should begin right from Aso Rock, that is the seat of government. And how do I mean here? Now, next week, the ministers will be at a retreat. Now, I will expect that within the presidency, somebody would have been given a task to define targets for every ministerial office. In which case, retreat over. As soon as people are assigned to their respective portfolios, they are handed over expectations. Any job where there are no expectations, you don't expect anything to be delivered. In fact, we say that a lot when we talk about performance management. In which case, define expectations and also let people know that we monitor it, which means there will be milestones. So the president hands over to them those expectations, which of course, you know that if they deliver, there will be an improvement in the socio-economic space in Nigeria. And so having done that, he also tells them in very strong terms that 1 year from now, I will come round to check how you are performing with respect to this. So it will not be a matter of constituency you are representing. It will not be a matter of I belong to this particular caucus or that, well, I am so much liked by the president. It's a matter of performance. Now, if we begin to do that now, I see every opportunity that by year 2023, President Buhari will leave tangible performance that Nigerians can touch. Now, when I say can touch, it means beyond merely telling them. They can feel it, they can sense it, and they can touch it. And that means the ordinary man on the road. And I will say this as a very important point. Put priority on roads, primarily. And my reason is simple. Whether a man is poor or rich, everybody goes on the roads. So once you do that, and we've seen results of studies all around the world, and that is why governments all around the world pay attention to roads as the primary infrastructure. Give more attention to that, we'll be able to create a lot more value in Nigeria. Of course, that value also goes in terms of jobs. And then, as I said earlier, they must get the private sector involved in infrastructure delivery. Government can't do it alone by borrowing. There's government can borrow here. There's also what you call debt capacity finance, which means there's a limit to which you can borrow, and then that capacity disappears. So where the private sector can come in there, because they will bring in efficiency, because for them it is money comes when I perform.
Well, what does the private sector want?
Now,
to bring the money to the table. I mean, domestic capital finance.
That's right. That is capital comes in, and then there's also what I call the technical input that comes with that. But there's this thing also, we take it from entrepreneurship. And that means any private investor will always look out for money he can make out of a venture. For that reason, he or she will want it to succeed. I put it before the Buhari government 4 years ago, in 2015, with respect to the power sector. And what I said there, I will repeat it again today. Until we meter every consumer of power in Nigeria, that sector will not be resolved. But the moment you meter every consumer, that means the power distribution companies will only get revenue that is equal to power delivered. And once power delivered falls short, it then means the revenue they receive will also drop. They are private investors. That will make them look backwards into the value chain. But insofar as they can still do estimated billing, they won't care about whether power comes or not. That is why power will come and they won't take it. So, but once that happens, they will look at the value chains and begin to talk to the gencos in the form of what we talked about earlier on, team working. And at least you need to generate more power so I can deliver more and be able to generate more revenue. And that is the role of the private sector. So you create such an environment, that makes them have this opportunity to deliver what government expects, and then also in the process they will make money anyway. That talks to wealth creation that you mentioned. But in the process, they've also created jobs. So both at the bottom of the pyramid, and of course, wealth for those who created it. And then in the midst of them, the middle class will start growing. And that's the powerhouse of every economy. Government should pay attention to that as well.
Dr. Adedekwe, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
We can spend the whole day discussing this, but thank you so much for bringing out the salient points where we need to go and how to do it from here. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of the holiday. Dr. Biodun Adedekwe, economist and financial consultant and founder and partner at B. Adedekwe Associates Limited.